Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, asarimhotep, and welcome to the Mbongi. Tonight is January the 14th, 2022, and our discussion is titled Reevaluating the Dogon: Issues and Methodologies in Response to Critiques. And this actually, I've decided that is going to be just the beginning, the preliminary talks for a series of conversations concerning the Dogon and answering certain pertinent questions that arise from scholarship in more recent times in reaction to Marcel Griot, who wrote the book Conversations with Ogotameli, um, and the Pale Fox, which we'll get into a little later. So we have a lot to cover. So all that and more when we return in just a moment. Welcome again to the Mbongi. This is your brother with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And this is a very special day. Nothing too special, but it's special because each and every one of us was able to get up today and contribute to our life's purpose. So every day is a special day. So we give thanks to the Creator and the ancestors and all of the conditions that allow for us to be here today. So I appreciate each and every one of you. You could be out at the club, but you chose to be here with me today, at least those of you who are watching live. And much love and light to each and one of you who are checking out the archives. So as usual, I like to start off with giving praise and thanks to all of those who made themselves known in the chat. And so peace and blessings to you, Sister Tamika. Welcome to the Mbongi. To Brother Omar Reed in the building. Peace and blessings to Brother Chavez and H-Town in the building. And yours truly, good evening to you as well. Peace and blessings to Anthony Bowman in the place. Brother Sunjiata and Zombie is in the place. Darnisha C. Pickett is in the building. Thank you for joining us. And Enigma 9x9 has made it into the conversation, and so has Miss Sylvia Stewart. Peace and blessings to you. Peace and blessings, Brother Jaded M. Unk Hekara. And I just received your email, so I'll be responding to you soon. Good brother. Peace and blessings again to yours truly. And who is this? Is it M Red or Mr. Ed? Peace and blessings. Thank you for joining us. Teti Ursama At Ra Saneferu is in the building. Peace and blessing to the Queen's Garden, Beauty and Wellness already. And Donald Flournoy is in the building. And I know I'm messing that last name up, but I've never heard you actually say it. But peace and blessings. Thank you for joining, and everyone else who is joining via Facebook. on the Harold Johnson page, as well as the asarimhotep. Thank each and every one of you for joining the conversation. So, excuse me. As mentioned earlier, the conversation is titled Reevaluating the Dogon. And this actually came about, and I've been meaning to do something like this for a number of years. But Brother Chavez, H-Town in here, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that all runs together. Know what I'm talking about. Sent me some correspondences or an article written by Walter von Beek et al. And some other, authors, doing a quote unquote restudy of the Dogon. And it appears that they have, how should I say, some issues with the stories as given to us of the Dogon through Marcel Griot. And it is primarily because they came some decades later and they were not able to reproduce a lot of the information that was given to Griot in the early 1940s. And keep in mind that Marcel Griot was first introduced to the Dogon in 1931. Was it 1930 or 1931? And was doing some field research there. And, he started to get some different information in the late 40s. And so some 15, plus years later, he passed away in 56. And so the article under discussion comes about in 1991, although the author had been doing research on the Dogon starting in 79. So that tells you a little bit on the nature of this conversation. So it is what we're going to cover here is, again, some preliminary stuff, because when the article itself is about 30 pages long, and to answer every single point by point in video conversation form, it would take forever. And so this is something that ultimately you have to answer in writing, and some people already have, but I just want to deal with the preliminary stuff on why much of his critique is unfounded. And so, we go with the Africans and what the Africans have to say about their own reality. They get priority in terms of what it means, or the meanings of the expressions and the values in which these African people have. So what I'm going to do is, in fact, share my screen. Let me get rid of that. And then we'll just kind of go through some things. And so, again, this isn't a too detailed study, because what I want to do is kind of organize each conversation based off of a single point, so that uh, each, issue gets dealt with adequately, and so we don't run into a whole bunch of, and we're just not all over the place and things of that nature. So uh that's that. And so make sure before y'all, get comfortable in things, that you in fact like this video and share it. And matter of fact, y'all can indeed. So I'm going to share my screen, and and we'll just share it all. So bong, you get the digital reverb of my screen. So let's do this. And so there's going to be a point where I kind of switch from the presentation and go directly into the book. And so let's start from the beginning. And so these are actually some of my notes, because again, I've been wanting to do this for a while. So this is from September 2020, but I'm very familiar with Walter von Beek and a few others who have made certain types of critiques. And the reason why this conversation is important is because you have a lot of Black folks who want to dismiss the Dogon narratives and their conclusions offhand. And some of this is based upon these critiques. And so, as y'all should know, at least on this channel in my sphere, you never just believe the critiques. You also have to critique the critiques. And so, it's somebody makes a claim, then somebody comes and challenges the claim, and then you got to wait for the rebuttals, at least a good back and forth one or two more times before you can really get a sense of what is going on and who really understands the arguments well or not. But what people are doing are taking Von Beeks and others critiques and not critiquing the critique, because one, they probably have never read in detail the documents under examination, and two, they are not really well vested in African culture and history. And that second part is going to be very vital in this initial critique. So of course, we are talking about the Dogon people in West Africa who currently lives in Mali. And, some people have speculated that they come from ancient Egypt. I'm not one of those individuals who make that argument, but I do believe that the ancient Egyptians and the ancestors of the modern Dogon did in fact exist and probably split in the Green Sahara, and when the Green Sahara started to desiccate and become more desert, forcing people to migrate in different points in Africa. And so, a lot of the correspondences that you see between the ancient Egyptians and the Dogon are more ancestral, which we can examine from a conceptual and a linguistic lens. So, for now, that is my argument. I don't argue that they derive directly from ancient Egypt, or at least pharaonic Egypt. And so, that is my point there. But they currently reside in the villages. There's around, see, what people don't understand is like the Dogon, even the language is there's like 20 variants of the Dogon language in terms of dialects and or languages. The Dogon is like a language family unto itself. So, and there's also like 700 villages allegedly of, saying the Dogon. And so it's not a very uniform place. They've been there for a while, but they're at their current location. They used to live among the Mande speakers further southwest. However, because of the incursions of Islam, they, wanting to not deal with Muslims, whether they're Arab or Black Muslims, and to settle and continue to live their own traditions. And so that's how they found themselves in those famous, cliffs. And so, as I mentioned before, this is just kind of an image of an old, of like part of the Green Sahara. There was a big central, watershed. There was, rivers that that connected. There was also some rivers that connected this way. And so, this is the present day limit where you see the green line here. But there used to be a lot more people and a lot more fauna or animals and plant life in the desert, which is now desert, but was green at one point. And so it is because of that desiccation of the Sahara that push people into these directions. Some going into Chad, some going into what is Nigeria and Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, and others going this way, all stemming from here. And so, and what I argue it is that because of this desiccation that forced the so-called Bantu speakers, the ones that move from Central East Africa, into the what is now the Sahara, there was a split. Some went this way, if you can see my mouse, and others went up the Nile, into what is called the Middle East. That's a different discussion for a different time and a set of arguments, of course, which I'm ready for. But there's another group of the same speakers who, because of the desertification, was pushed down, and they pushed through Nigeria further into Cameroon and then spread from there. So, so just keep that in mind. And so, just some images of the Dogon. Here's a good Dogon book by who's this? Chukwuma Azionye, doctor, on the Dogon. These are the Dogon versions of the Mbongi. If those of you are familiar with the Mbongi or the Mboka, it's a center area town where the community and elders gather to discuss business concerning uh, the community and the direction it needs to go and things of that nature. So, pay attention to the artwork that holds up the home, and some real dope stuff. I would like to see something like that on a larger scale in our communities. But here's from the Sigu dance. It looked like some bros from Alpha Phi Alpha hopping, from U of H, but I ain't gonna go there today. Here's the cliffs in which they live. There's actually some cliffs that look like this in the Americas as well, which is very interesting. But no, I'm not trying to argue that they came here on boats and the first blacks here in America. That's not my argument. So to give you a kind of insight into some of the issues that we have here, I like to invoke this text here: The Invention of Africa, Gnosis, Philosophy, and the Order of Knowledge. And it is edited by V.Y. Mudimbe, right? And which is who you can see here on the right. And on page 142, they discuss a little bit about the Dogon and the issues of Marcel Griot, right? So on page 142, it says, many of Griot's detractors have questioned the interest of the Dogon's intellectual speculations. Because ultimately, and I'm going to pause here, ultimately, that's what it is about. See, what they're trying to not directly say is that these Black African people are not intelligent enough to come up with these conversations. So what they're trying to say is that Marcel Griot made up these concepts. So the Dogon concepts that are attributed to the Dogon in reality comes from the imagination of the white man by the name of Marcel Griot, who lived in and existed with them for a number of years. And so ultimately, this is the argument. So since they can't just outright say, at least in this day and time, that the Dogon people are not intelligent folks, that they can come up with these complex systems, these astronomical observations, et cetera, will challenge their intellect via Marcel Griot. And this is exactly what's happening. So I'll just start again from the beginning. Many of Griot's detractors have questioned the interest of the Dogon's intellectual speculations, which seem to them to be floating in a sociological void. as if lineage family existed independently of the system of representations which they arrived at in order to explain existence, as if empirical social reality could be analytically disassociated from the symbolic. It is trivial to object that the thought of the Dogon doctors, for example, is not the same as that of the ignorant men. In 1948, Griot already foresaw this argument and answered it forcefully, which he states, one would not undertake to charge the Christian dogma of the transubstantiation with esotericism on the pretext that the man in the street does not know the word and has only glimmerings of the thing itself. Who would dare deny that Christianity has, for its formation and throughout the centuries, established the ultimate reference point of our own social system, beyond the various modes of production which have marked its development? What is he saying in this latter part here? You know, you don't judge Christian or the doctrine of Christianity based upon just the average person's on that you just randomly meet on the streets knowledge of it. We know for a fact that folks, everyday folks who go to church don't know crap about the Bible, its history, and its deep thoughts. There for them, the religion is more so experiential. It's not intellectual. But there are individuals who dedicate their lives to a deep study of the text, and they are far flung in between. So for every, you know, let's just say 10,000 people who are Christians, you may be able to find maybe 5 out of that 10,000. And I'm just making up the number, but it's to make a point that you'll probably find 5 people who are serious students of the Bible who would go to the extent of studying the language, understanding and going through each of the primary documentations, who do translations, who do historical analysis, and comparative studies with other Middle Eastern, cultures, and know about Indo-European cultures and the interactions between Rome. Like there's very few individuals that you would just randomly find on the street who would be able to articulate these things. So why would you judge the presence of a particular type of philosophy within Christianity based upon your interactions with an average Joe Blow that you just meet on the street? And this is exactly what has been done with a lot of these researchers, just going into Mali, finding some random dudes and be like, hey, do you know about the companion star of Sirius B? And they looking at them crazy, like, I'm just trying to find something to eat today. And I'm about to go to the Dogon Club and I'm about to find me a woman to dance next to. As if the Dogon just aren't just average everyday people in the world. And so, so this kind of lays a foundation in terms of the essential thrust of the discussion that we're having today. So what I want to do is get into just some concepts of why, or just some passages of why it is an error to just go into a community and just start asking random folks stuff about a tradition which requires so much more in involvement that very few people have the opportunity to get within that society. We're not talking about just a small community of 50 people. There's thousands of people in these villages. And so for you, the chance that you can just randomly walk upon somebody who's going to have the deep knowledge of the cultural system and history, especially in modern times, as a result of the incursions in terms of Islam, in Christianity and other wars and other things that we find in modern Mali, which diminishes, which has not allowed for certain systems to thrive as they once did prior to the the incursion of these external forces. And so that's even discussed even in the Pale Fox. But right now we're going to jump to conversations with Ogotomeli, because this seems to be a kind of at the center of much of Von Beek's, critiques. So, this is the text, Conversations with Ogotomeli, an introduction to Dogon religious ideas, by Marcel Griot. And, in this, just a little bit of background. Remember what I said at the beginning. From 1931, onward, Marcel Griot and his team have been documenting Dogon culture, thought, and things of this nature. But after a series of events, some years later, almost 2 decades later, one with the building of a dam, which allowed them, to get water and stuff to this nature from Griot, and again because of World War II, and some of the French army trying to come in and invade and take over the territory. These, Griot actually fought against the French on the side of the Dogon. So, of course, after years of his inquiries, and then of course with his help and his willingness to even shed blood on behalf of the Dogon, even though he had his own, because he's a white man and he's coming from Europe, and there's it's just the way that they are. They don't understand how to be all the time with people. But even despite all of that, they decided to initiate him into the deeper aspects of their teachings. So it first starts with this man here. But when you're looking at Ogotomeli, you're not just looking at a single person, because he had to get permission from the other elders, the council of elders, to share this information, and they restricted what information that he should be given, and he had to check back with him daily. So for 33 days straight, he shared the information. This is an elder, and he was also blind. And so this blind elder, who consulted with a body of elders, was able to share, and he was able to record and document, and this ultimately became the book, Conversations with Ogotomeli, which in the original title was, God of Water, um, in French. And so we'll go from there. So he states, starting on page 2, it might be thought that we are here concerned with esoteric teaching. Some have even suggested on a first impression, without waiting for further details, that it was a case of personal speculations of merely secondary interest. These are, moreover, the very people who will devote a lifetime to the presumably personal ideas of Plato or Julian of Halicarnassus. But although the full range of this teaching is known only to elders, only to the elders and to certain initiates, it is not esoteric in character, since anyone who reaches old age can acquire it. Moreover, totemic priests of all ages are acquainted with those parts of the doctrine which specifically concern them, while the ritual observances attaching to the corpus of beliefs are practiced by, and then it goes on there. But I want to re-emphasize this line here. It says, but although the full range of this teaching is known only to the elders and to certain initiates, it is not esoteric in character. And so if you were to go amongst the Dogon, you would have to first and foremost understand again that not only is just the average Joe Blow on the street not going to know much, you would have to find favor with the elders, and only a few of them have certain information. And then it goes on to say that, moreover, totemic priests of all ages are acquainted with those parts of the doctrine which specifically concern them. So even though you have a group of initiated elders, they're not going to have and know everything in every doctrine. They're more concerned with the aspect of the teachings that concerns their totem, their role in the collective priesthood. So it's just like if you were to go into the Ifa tradition or the Isheshe tradition of the Yoruba people, you know, just because you are familiar with Shango or Ogun or Oya or Oshun, et cetera, doesn't mean that you know all the details. Each one of those deities are a priesthood. And so while there is some overlap and shared stories that a few people that the majority of people may know that is common knowledge, there are also aspects of those particular schools, those colleges. So Oshun is a college, Shango is a college, Ogun is a college. So when you enter those colleges, those teachings, there are certain things that are unique to you and your group as Ogun priests, as Shango priest, as Oya priestesses, etc. So you're not going to get the same things that everyone gets if you belong to, a priesthood of Ochosi, for example. So it is no different when you go amongst the people in Mali as the text here. And so these are some things that you just have to keep in mind. And so, excuse me. And so it continues. Obviously, the ordinary people do not apprehend the profounder significance of their actions and their prayers. Because one thing I'm gonna pause here. One thing we have to understand is that culture is created, and it is the elders who design the culture. And so they may have initiated and framed the culture decades, hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years ago. But there is only a few initiated people who have the education to understand why aspects of the culture are done the way that it is. We call them quote unquote priests. They are keepers of the body of wisdom that allows for the maintaining and the harmony of society. That's what a quote unquote priest is an expert in these particular skills and knowledge of history and things and culture that allow for the society to be maintained and flourish into the future. So obviously the ordinary people do not apprehend the profounder significance of their actions and their prayers, but this is true of all peoples. The Christian dogma of transubstantiation cannot be called esoteric merely because the man in the street is ignorant of the word and has only vague ideas as to its meaning. Similar reservations might be made as to the explanatory and representative value of these doctrines and their bearing on African mentality in general. It might be maintained, for example, that what is true of the Dogon is not true of the other peoples of the Western Sudan. This is going to be very important because Van Beek makes a stupid statement that what we find among the Dogon, we can't find in other people in other cultures of West Africa. What makes you think that you are supposed to? Why must they all just be the same people? Like there cannot be diversity in that Africanness. And so before Von Beek even is thought of and comes on the scene, he already answered this question. It might be maintained, for example, that what is true of the Dogon is not true of the other peoples of the Western Sudan. So to make that kind of argument would just be silly. But Von Beek, Walter Von Beek, and his clan does make that argument, and we might get into that later. So hold on just 1 second as I take a sip here, and let me see what's going on. Let me see. I'm just trying to read a few of your comments before I move on. Got my big thing of green tea, even though it ain't, the good tea, but it is what it is. So let's continue. So now we're just going to, it's not random. This is all coming from the introduction, but, we're just going to take some pieces of the Pale Fox, which explains a lot of this, what we're talking about here. So this is starting on page 27. So this text is written by Marcel Griot, but keep in mind that he dies in 56, and this is his daughter, Dierteline, and she continued to put the book together after his death. So this is a book that was posthumously published. So that's why she is also a co-author, in the text, and she's not random either. She has been with him during those initiations, during those investigations as well. So let's continue. So he states the social structure of these different populations, and prior to page 27, he's noting the kinship and the history and the movement of the Dogon. So the people who he's talking about, the social structure of these different populations, he's talking about the Mandingo, the Bombara, the Bozo, Somogo, Marca, and the Fulbe or the Fulani, who are united by kinship or marriage, and in some cases by common origin, is based upon analogous principles and is strengthened by an identical cosmogonic myth. The ritual manifestations, though apparently different, reveal the same beliefs and originate from a comparable mental structure. So what he's saying here is that essentially, the surface ritual differences hide a deep underlying common structure and thought process amongst all these people, and that they, even though they tell the story differently, it's essentially all the same story. And so again, he's talking about the Mandingo, the Bombara, the Bozo, Somogo, Marca, and the Fulani. And so it would be very critical just to start here and then really start to examine the customs, the culture, and the indigenous wisdom traditions from these groups of people, and then align them with what you find in the Pale Fox. I would also add that you have to add the Daguerre people, the and the Akan and Ga folks of Burkina Faso, as well as northern Ghana, and of course mid and southern Ghana. because these are all related people, and you will see a lot of these uh common themes reiterated throughout these particular wisdom traditions. And matter of fact, the Daguerre tradition, the Daguerre priesthood, in reality is a Dogon priesthood. But I'm gonna save that for one of the subsequent conversations. And all of this is going to be relevant once we start examining Von Beek's arguments. So we continue on page 33 and 34. So I'm just kind of setting up the framework to examine some of the critiques of Von Beek, which we'll be getting into in just a little bit. So he says there exists a ritual language, Sigiso, or the language of the Sigui, which is taught, and Sigui is a festival that is centered around the appearance of the Sirius and its cycle and things of that nature. So, and the ancient Egyptians had the same festival and it's titled the same thing as well. That's another conversation. But theirs, when they're looking for Sirius, the appearance of it at a certain level, it also coincides with the rising of the Nile, and so they know that the flood is coming soon. But we'll get into that. So Sigiso, or the language of the Sigui, which is taught to the dignitaries of the Society of Mass. So this ritual language is not taught to everyone. It is only taught to the dignitaries of the Society of Mass. It's a specific, for a lack of a term, a secret society, or a society of secrets, which we, for the most part, like to call a wisdom tradition. So for the Society of a Mass called Awa, which I think, may possibly be cognate with an owl in the Yoruba tradition. I still have to investigate, so don't quote me on that. At the time when they take the office during the ceremony of the Sigu, held every 60 years. Sigiso is a poor language containing about a quarter of the vocabulary of Dogoso. Its words seem to stem from the Jura language and Niger Congo languages. And so if y'all have my text, Nesubiti, King in Ancient Egyptian, at the beginning of the text, I have a conversation about secret languages in Africa. And I go all across Africa and I discuss these things. And I re-emphasize, and I didn't even cite this text, which I should add it, to the updated version of the text, this as just another example of how secret languages in many so-called priesthoods really just be languages of other ethnic groups from which who have migrated and brought their priesthood with them, and their native language became the priesthood language of that particular society, but they have been absorbed in the main primary language of the group is the dominant language of the area. And so I discussed this when it comes to the Yoruba and a particular priesthood there. It comes from, it's just another language of some far-flung, now probably extinct language. And so that's something that we got to consider as well. Sigi is so poor a language containing about a quarter. Sigiso is a poor language containing about a quarter of the vocabulary of Dogoso, which is the Dogon language. Its words seem to stem from the Jur or Gur language and Niger Congo languages. The Sigui dignitaries, the Olobaru, are skilled in declaiming in the Sigu language the story of the creation of the universe, of human life, and of the advent of death on earth during funeral ceremonies and the rites of the end of mourning called Dama. And so which I think is cognate with the word duat, but we'll discuss that at another time. But what is he saying here, which is very important, that to get the creation story, this particular creation story, It is only told in the Sigiso language. But the Sigiso language, as we read at the beginning at the top here, is only taught to dignitaries of the Society of Mask. So if you were to go and just randomly start asking folks and informants on the ground about a certain type of creation myth, they won't know about it because they would have to be in the Society of Mask and they would have to learn the Sigiso language. So this is a very narrow group, and this reinforces the earlier citation that talks about how each group, each college has certain teachings that is only unique to them, which is not about, which is not shared with everyone. But because they are all Dogon, it's still part of the collective Dogon lore. And so we continue on page 58. The development of Dogon thought, and hence the elaboration of concepts, proceeds by analogy and has constant recourse to the symbol. An expression opens and closes a sentence when the Dogon wish to underscore the presence of a symbol. Aduno so, which is defined as the spoken word of the world, is used by them in the same way we say symbolically. So when we say like symbolically, for them, we would translate it as aduno so, the spoken word of the world. On the other hand, the Dogon term expresses the function for the symbol itself, integrated into a system which simultaneously describes and comprises everything contained by the universe, Aduno. Now, let's pay attention to what it said. I know I kind of read that fast. But what he's saying is that the concept of symbol and sign is called Arduino so. That word Arduino can double as both the word for world or universe. And this is interesting because this is the Dogon way of, of saying what the ancient Egyptians called Medu Neter, the words of the divine, or divine words, the words of nature. And so the signs and symbols of Meta Nature, the Sesh Meta Nature, evolved into a full-out writing script to record everyday um, concepts. But the Arduino so, the cognate, the conceptual cognate for Medu Neter remained a, kind of a priestly signs and symbols, and they never used it for the kind of formal writing that we do. But each sign and symbol represents a phenomena in nature, just like what you see in the Sesh Meta Neter hieroglyphic script. Although the script, in terms of the graphics of the Sesh Meta Neter, is more detailed and more of a full representation of nature itself, whereas for the Dogon, they're using something that's more mathematical, more abstract to represent these fundamental concepts. And if you get the pale fox, and especially, you'll see it all through the text, but especially if you open and go to the back of the text, you'll see a lot of these signs. But Aduno so is Medu Neter for the Dogon. Page 59. Thus, the thought of the black world is oriented towards a knowledge which may sometimes be confused with an adequate understanding, but which is most often a Sophie. And we know that Sophie is the Greek word for wisdom, which they actually got from ancient Egypt, from the word Seba, meaning wisdom, also teacher, and also student in the ancient Egyptian language. This thought makes of the universe an orderly whole, where the notion of law is less present than that of pre-established harmony incessantly troubled, and continually reordered. Each part of this entirety epitomizes the whole. There is neither subject nor object, only things linked in one domain. As a result of the preceding principle, the black mind establishes a network of equivalences between all things by means of a system of symbols, which, by harmonious interplay and imperceptible shifts, leads from the harp to the craft of weaving, from the garment to the creative word, from the demiurge to the refuse, for it involves a sort of practical and theoretical metaphysics, which, on the one hand, explains the universe, thus responding to the innate need to understand, and on the other hand, forms the spiritual framework of men's lives. What is being said here, especially in the highlighted red points? Remember just a few conversations ago that, we were talking about the Big Bang, right? And we're talking about the Big Bang concept amongst the Bantu Congo. And I also added into the conversation the ancient Egyptians. They had their own theory of Big Bang, right? And, you know, on the Pseudo Killers channel, they kept asking, well, how did they know? What tools? And not understanding the framework which helped to develop the theory in the first place, because they understood, just like how we understand today, that the laws of the universe are uniform throughout the universe. Like, there's no place in the universe where the laws of physics do not exist. And so how the ancients would say this was, as below, so above, as above, so below. And so what they would do is they would look at processes that we would see on Earth, or if we saw certain things in the stars, and then speculate as to how this happens in other domains, including the creation of the universe itself. And we discussed that in that particular program. And I gave one orientation of how, like, the observation of volcanoes inspired certain creation myths in terms of the universe. And it's the same thing here amongst the Dogon. So it's this framework, and notice that the author understands that this type of thinking and this type of culture permeates throughout the African world. So he doesn't just say the Dogon mind, he says the black mind establishes a network of equivalences between all things by means of a system of symbols. And so understanding Black and African culture is what's going to be needed to have intelligent conversations about, the thought processes of these African groups. And so people want to comment about African folks and don't study in depth their texts and their literature. Don't go visit the people. Don't sit around them. Don't read their texts. They go on Google and start finding some information that appears to coincide with their current thought process, and we proceed to have conversations based on that. This book is very thick, and it's going to take you several reads. This is not an easy text to get through. And I'm talking about the Pale Fox, which you see on the screen here. So, just keeping that in mind. So this is part of the framework in which we are having this conversation today. So we continue on page 64. For the Dogon, as for other societies of West Africa, the least ordinary object reveals in its forms and designs the conscious expression of a complex cosmogony. Thus, a checkered Sudanese blanket is a text in which woven designs constitute signs intentionally displayed by its users and understood by the initiates, which I have highlighted here in red. A basket intended for carrying things represents, when turned upside down, The arc on which humanity descended from heaven to earth, the square bottom of the object representing space and the cardinal points. And so, ordinary objects, the way that they design baskets or just creating a blanket, is all connected to a greater teaching of cosmogony, which itself is also reflecting upon processes here on earth. And so they're not just doing cosmogony for cosmogony's sake. They're looking at the common patterns of the creation of things so that they can replicate them in various domains to help with the sustaining of the community. This is kimoyo. This is what you see on my shirt. This is why we named it kimoyo. This is the essence of kimoyo in African wisdom traditions, what we're calling African spirituality. It has to deal with reality. It has to deal with the understanding and the knowledge of processes in nature that allow for systems and domains to flourish, and how to understand those processes and how to reduplicate those processes at will in synthetic, systems that are created by human beings. And so we continue. Page 65. So, whether of daily or religious use, these almost innumerable materials constitute the established archives of these people, as well as evidence of that knowledge. They constitute also for the learned men a mnemotechnic aid. And so we know what an mnemonic device is. It is just a sign or a symbol that is used to jolt the memory of a greater teaching. And so from page 64 to 65, they're talking about how initiates would know, even though these patterns, these common everyday items are used by everyone, but everyone is not going to know the deeper aspects of these signs and symbols. They're just participating in the culture. And we do this too. Not understanding, for example, how in the United States, Masonic philosophy and architecture and all of this is involved in the development of your cities. You may be going into places thinking this is just an ordinary pathway, that these streets are named the way that they're named, arbitrarily, that this statue over here is pointing at a direction, just randomly as just part of the art project. No, it's these are so-called esoteric teachings and things for those who are Masons and understand or belong to other, types of societies. And because all of this information is used to perpetuate and to keep the knowledge of how to run a society. And so all you everyday Joe Blows walking the street ain't going to know these things. And so if somebody was to come ask you about some deep esoteric things of the Sam Houston statue, in Huntsville, Texas, pointing this way, you're not going to know. You're just like, that's a big ass statue of Sam Houston pointing, not understanding he's pointing in a direction of a Masonic lodge. If you go that way, this is where the house, and the way that he stands, and this, and this. All societies have these things. And so the Dogon are no different in this domain. And so this idea that the lay person, is not going to be privy to the knowledge of what the wisdom keepers would know in traditional societies is something that we've talked about before. And and I always like to bring up this example from the late Credo Mutwa, Vusuma Zulu Credo Mutwa to be exact, especially as talked about in his text in Daba My Children. And so African Folktales is the subtitle. And for those who don't know, the late Credo Mutwa was an artist, but he was also a priest, and an initiate in several African wisdom traditions across the continent. And, he lived a very long life. And unlike Ogotomeli, however, Ogotomeli got permission from the elders to share the secrets with Marcel Griot. However, Credu Mutwa did not. He actually broke tradition by sharing the stories and deep esoteric wisdom of the Amazulu in Azania, quote unquote, South Africa, uh, in the current state. So he has been challenged and kind of been ostracized from the wisdom keepers, from the system in which he belonged, because he decided to go against protocol and share this. And he did this, with good intentions, but ultimately it's a failure because his hope was to show the world that the Bantu speaking people were not, some savages, that they had deep thought, and that they, had human ideas, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm grateful for the information because it has allowed me to make certain connections in my research, and just, looking for those nuggets that we can, take for in as part of our re-Africanization process. That's a sacrifice that I appreciate. But just making a distinction here. So, like, unlike like Malidoma Some is another one. What we get in the late Dr. Malidoma Some's work is the result of him consulting elders and getting permission to share it. And so, this is a common thing. So, like, if you, for the most part, if you're getting some wisdom, this, and you're not initiated into it, the person sharing it had to get permission from the elders in his particular uh college or wisdom tradition. And so, with that said, he starts off the conversation here when he's talking about his initiation, about the nature of God and how they understand God amongst the Bantu. And so he says, it is said that the Bantu have no conception of a universal single God, that in their religion they worship the spirits of their long dead ancestors, that they are superstitious and fetish ridden and tremble when the thunder growls. The world has been shown images carved by the Bantu, and this would appear to be the sum total of the knowledge foreigners have gained about our religion. The Bantu believe in the existence of God, but their concept of God is different from that of other races. While we believe in a heaven, or concept of heaven is totally different from, our concept of heaven is totally different from that held by other races. The Bantu version of hell is an evil land, but in this land, we see no devil with no tail, horns, and a forked tongue, tormenting the souls of the wicked in eternal hellfire. So, um, so now the elder is teaching him. So now the elder is speaking here. So, my child, you know from the teachings of your parents that every child is taught that there is a great God, and that there are also the lesser gods, but you do not know just what the great God, whom we shall call the most ultimate God, is. And this you are about to be told to this today. The most ultimate God, who is the God of the gods, is everything and everything. So, as you should know by now on this channel, God is existence itself. It is everything and all things at once. So here's just one more source coming from Africa where this is the common belief. So each tree, each blade of grass, and each stone that you see out there, and each one of the things that live, be they men or beasts, are all parts of God. Just as each one of the hairs on your head, and each flea in your hair, and each drop of your blood is part of you. The sun is part of God. The moon is part of God. And each one of these stars is but an infinitesimal part of him who is and yet is not, him who was and yet was not, and him who will be and yet shall never be, because there never was a time when God was not, and there never is a time when God can never be. So this is why we say, from a general African perspective, it's impossible to be an atheist, because you cannot exist and believe in existence and that things exist, but then say that God does not exist, when God is defined as the very existence, the very universe for which you are a part of. But that's another conversation for another day. And so, so he goes on, and the elders, continuing his lessons, creating Mutwa's lessons as he's being initiated into Sangomahood, right? And so it just continues in terms of what the nature of God, what God looks like, and we can only guess, and that you must go and review some of these carvings. Remember, at the beginning of the conversation, he talks about these particular carvings and art objects, which are known by everyone, but we're going to get into an understanding that just because people know about it don't mean that they know the teachings about it. And so, you know, uh, they go into this particular type of carving, which you see right here, which is supposed to be a representation of God. I will leave this here just as a so that you can, pause it if you are, coming back and reviewing this conversation. So, this isn't important to what I'm trying to get to now. I just want to go through it. But this is what is important, which is relevant to the conversation regarding the Dogon. So just like what we read in the Pale Fox and the conversations with Ogo Tameli about certain knowledge being, only reserved for certain initiates and elders, etc. We see the same thing here amongst the Amazulu. And so, according to Mutwa, the elder is still talking to Mutwa. All these carved concepts of the form of God are only a means of satisfying the common rabble, which cannot be made to worship any God unless that God has a shape that they can more or less understand and hold in the mind. They are also intended to discourage young people from asking too many questions. And you, O chosen one, you initiate, must only bear this in the valleys of your mind, that God is there and the lesser gods are there, but no one can ever know what their forms are. A God must never be interpreted as having a fixed shape. God can assume any shape he desires in whatever form would suit his purpose best at any given time. There may be times when lesser gods can assume the shapes of animals or trees or even rocks and boulders. But the reason why the lesser gods more often take human form is because we would understand better when they communicate with us. Matter of fact, Dr. Maladoma Some says the same thing about the Kotemble, and that would be a good comparison in terms of the philosophy here. But the point is you're talking about the objects, the art objects are made or only a means of satisfying the common rabble, meaning the lay person. This particular teacher is very rude and straight to the point. And so, which cannot be made to worship any God unless that God has a shape that they can more or less understand and hold in the mind. So when you understand this, you understand that the teachings, the artwork and things are there just to satisfy those who have not been trained to think abstractly, to think about concepts without necessarily them having to have a particular type of form. So those who are initiates, they must understand it on the abstract level, whereas on the base level, people will only understand it, as on a real surface level. And this is what we're saying here. And so it continues. So now Mutwa is speaking. My instructor proceeded to explain that while these masks and carvings serve their purpose to instruct children and the common people, I, as a chosen one, as an initiate, as a Sangoma, as a Babalawo, as an Nganga, must know more about our actual concept of God. I cannot repeat his actual words as it would occupy far too much space, and he explained everything in a symbolism which many of my readers would fail to comprehend. Briefly, he compared the universe with a gigantic ant hill. This is going to be very important as well in the subsequent conversations, because Van Beek, Walter Van Beek, tries to make an argument that the ant hill is not a true translation of a phrase that Griot, who and his daughter, who created a dictionary of the Dogon language, didn't understand. And so part of my discussion is going to be that when you examine Bantu philosophy and cosmology and Dogon philosophy and cosmology, they mirror in very significant ways. And one of these ways is the universe being seen as an anthill. So the structure as a whole is God, and us, and everything we see about it is merely the ants and the sand grains inside the anthill. So again, there's the expectation is that the layperson, the person who doesn't do, that is not of the discipline, they're going to have surface information at best. But you, as an initiate, are required to understand this on a deeper level. And so when Walter Van Beek and others come into the conversation and don't believe Griot when he says that there are individuals, initiates, very few of them, who have this deeper knowledge about the things, and they can't reduplicate it because they don't have the relationships, they don't have the access the way that Griot has in regards to the particular conversations that you find in the conversations with Ogotomeli and the Pale Fox. So this is the conversation, or the article here is titled Dogon Restudied, a Field Evaluation of the Work of Marcel Griot, and Comments and Replies by Walter E.A. Van Beek, RMA Bidou, Suzanne Preston Blair, Jackie Boujou, or Bouge, I don't know how to pronounce that, Peter Ian Crawford, Mary Douglas, Paul Lane, Claude Melsu. So, you know, all of these people getting together to try to give the business to Marcel Griot and his team. So this is the first part of our presentation, and so I am going to just play, you know, the commercial regarding the film, and then we are going to come back for the second half. So actually, I can't share it on here. So I'm on two different computers. So what I'll do is remove that real quick. And what I'm going to do is stop the sharing there, but I'm going to start the share there. And so you need to get a drink or something. This will be a good time, but I encourage you to watch the thing if you haven't seen the commercial. And so video projects, I got so much stuff on this computer, it's crazy. So with that said, I will see you in a bit.
You see, I have a lot of things that's on my mind, and I would like to let them out. Look, I I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart? I don't do the things that I used to. I'll be fine even if I lose you, okay? Yeah. Okay.
Peace and blessings, family. My name is asarimhotep, and I am with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, as well as the popular YouTube channel Mbongi. I am an Africologist and computer scientist out of Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I have spent the last 20 years researching the connections between ancient Kemet, that is modern Egypt, and modern Bantu-speaking cultures of Central and Southern Africa. Throughout this 20-year journey, I've examined all the relevant literature in numerous languages, collected paleontological as well as archaeological data from across millennia. I have presented hypotheses and abandoned hypotheses, come to conclusions and abandoned conclusions, reviewed arguments for and against known hypotheses, and analyzed frameworks that sought to define and characterize the vast array of African experiences. After over 20 years of asking critical questions of history, of philosophy, religion, and culture, I have finally gotten to the point where I have complete and total faith in the results of our research. I say our research because I am one of among a number of scholars who have either laid the foundations in classical Africology or are continuing to expand and develop more robust research on this connection between ancient Egyptian and Bantu civilizations. After spending so much time behind the computer and in the libraries and in the museums for over 20 years, I believe it is time to go out and to touch the living artifacts and engage with the people involved in the research whose stories we have been telling all this time, which brings us to why we are here today. Although I have written and will continue to write about the results of my research, my goal now is to summarize this data and present it in documentary film form. I have decided to put some of that computer science as well as new media experience together to creatively tell this important aspect of African history that many may not be aware of. The title of the film is China Into, Ancient Kemet and the Into Universe, and we are currently raising funds for the first phase of our journey. In February of 2022, I will be joining the crew of the award-winning documentary film Happy, The Role of Economics on the Development of Civilization, for a very important Returning to the Source tour and conference in Egypt, which we know is in Northeast Africa. And while I am there, I will be shooting parts of our film China Into and gathering footage for a proof of concept trailer, which will be used for greater fundraising efforts in the near future. And this is where I am currently trying to raise $5,000 to help with location expenses, equipment rentals, insurance, and the like, so that we can get some great shots for some primary as well as B-roll footage. When we return from Egypt, some of this footage will be combined with some preliminary interviews to compile a unique trailer to give the audience and potential investors a glimpse of the vision and potential of the film. Our ultimate goal is to travel to places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and South Africa for the first film. And did I forget to mention that we intend for this to be a series of documentary films? Therefore, subsequent films will require us to travel to places like Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, as well as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. We have big goals, and with your help, we can make this happen. And if you're interested in donating to this film project, please visit our website at www.chinaintofilm.com, where you can leave a donation. There are other ways you can donate as well, which includes joining our Patreon page, uh, donating through Cash App, or donating live when we're doing a live show on YouTube. And the YouTube channel has over 6,000 subscribers, and Facebook has over 5,000 subscribers as well. And with a minimum donation of like $5 each, we can quickly reach our goal. You can spread the word of our efforts by sharing this video with friends and colleagues, as well as liking it. We appreciate your help, and all donors will be given credit on the website, as well as at the end of the film during the credits. We thank you from the bottom of our heart to those who have given generously already, and we look forward to bringing this important film to the public. Hotep. Peace and blessings. We are back, and thank you for joining us today. And if you are just joining us, the conversation is titled Reevaluating the Dogon, Issues and Methodologies in Response to Critiques. And in the first part, I was kind of laying out the framework for the conversation, which we're about to have now, as the secondary part of our discussion. And we talked about how, African societies, in terms of indigenous pedagogical systems, are marked by initiations and rites, and certain information that is given to surface folks are expanded upon, and or they may have entirely different teachings in the schools of thought in the different colleges uh, of these indigenous wisdom traditions. And so now we're going to get into this uh, to Walter Van Beek's, some of his issues and critiques. And again, the article is over 30 pages long. It's impossible for me to go line by line and go through everything, but I plan to do that in writing. But some of our videos in the future will address some of those things. So this is just a preliminary discussion, an informal discussion, and just want to thank, before I go, Sister Sylvia Stewart, for your donation. It is greatly appreciated. And I did receive the donations from B. Sims and our good brother Alan Flagg. Thank you very much for the donations via the Cash App. So I did receive those and want to acknowledge. I am going to reshare. Let me remove that from the studio, and I'm going to reshare my screen, and we can continue to get busy tonight. So let's start from the current slides, and let me make sure that everybody can see, and we are good to go. So as I mentioned before the break, the excuse me, the article which kind of sparked this conversation was published in 1991 by Walter E.A. von Beek and et al., as we would say in academia, titled Dogon Restudied, a Field Evaluation of the Work of Marcel Griot, and comments and replies, which you can visit or get it at this link right here. And, it's currently open source now, but it's on JSTOR. So let's go. So on the right is Walter E.A. von Beek. And from the article above, this is the commentary, or some of the commentary from the pages. And I did not cite but I think this is page 1 or 2 uh, from the text that I just cited. So I didn't put the page number on here, but believe me, this is what he said. It's either page 1 or page 2. So when talking about Griolle's work, he states Griolle published on the Dogon from the early 30s, the Dakar Djibouti expedition of 1931 and 1933, and until his death in 1956, and a major work co-authored by Germain de Ertling appeared posthumously in 1965. That is The Pale Fox. That's the original date. Of course, the English came later. So for present purposes, and his works were originally written in French. So for present purposes, his Dogon ethnography may be divided into 3 major periods. From 1931 to 1948, he publishes descriptive accounts of the Dogon life, concentrating on material culture. His theses, the Estat Masked Dogons, in 1938, hereafter MD, is the high point of the period, which Clifford, 1983, calls Griot's documentary phase. Now, I have highlighted here a very important point. He says, my critique is not directed at his works of this period or those of his many collaborators. Indeed, their vision of Dogon culture coincides to a significant degree with mine. It is the latter presentation of Dogon culture with which it is concerned. So this is very important to note, because before 1948, all of the work was just the initial preliminary stuff. But because of Griot's initiation, he got access to other information which he has not been able to verify. So that's why he says, my critique is not directed at his works of this period, the earlier period, but of the latter period, because he can't reduplicate the findings. So we're going to see why this is important. So I have in my notes to go to Pale Fox, page 69, Brother Asar. So that's what we're going to do. So let me just pull it up. So I have a scanned version of the Pale Fox. Since I don't have my physical copy with me, it's still in Philly, we are going to go to, we're still in the introduction. This is page 69. And so what I'm going to do is kind of blow this up a little. I don't know if y'all still be able to read it. Hopefully y'all will. I didn't feel like typing all of this, which I'm about to read, so please excuse me. So this is this is very important, this page here. So we're going to read it from the beginning. And sorry for the edges. I didn't scan this version, so it's hard to read. But those who have the Pale Fox, if you have it now, just open it to page 69 and follow along with me. If I was in my Hebrew Israelite days, I'd be like, read. And then I have one of y'all read, and then I stop you in the mid-sentence and then elaborate. Then I'll be like, read, But unfortunately, I don't have any Hebrew Israelites with me right now. So y'all just gonna have to bear with my reading as we have this conversation. So with that said, he's talking about, this is the section titled Initiation, right? So we can go up. So we see this here, initiation, starting on page 67, is it? Yeah, page 67 starts the initiation discussion of the Dogon. So we're going to go now to 69 at the top of the page. Besides, the instruction demands a permanent effort of anyone wishing to be initiated. He's talking about the lifelong process of initiation. It's not just, you could just randomly come and get this information. It's a lifelong process, like most initiatory systems in Africa. If he is to learn what will be told or communicated to him spontaneously, he must want to educate himself, and to understand, he himself must question his father or his mother, his maternal uncle, and finally the learned elders of the group, who, if he proves himself worthy and manifests the necessary patience and perseverance, will answer all his questions. The answers themselves give rise to other questions necessary for a complete understanding. If the candidate does not actively participate in the exchange, it is because, and I'm going to pause here. So, something I don't want to skip over. When he says, if he is to learn what will be told or communicated to him spontaneously, he must want to educate himself, and to understand, he himself must question his father or his mother, his maternal uncle, and finally the learned elders. What a lot of people don't realize, who don't engage in as a participant in any African system, is that certain knowledge is only it only exists in a certain bloodline, in a certain family. And so, those of you who are my age and a little older, y'all may recall that, on Saturdays used to be the Kung Fu Theater, right? You couldn't wait for Saturday Kung Fu Theater. So, I was young, so the old movies used to play on the TV on Saturdays after the cartoons. Now, for my parents in their, growing up in the late 60s and 70s, they had the opportunity to go see these films in the theater. So they stopped being in the theater. I was born in 9. So in the 80s, it used to uh the kung fu films used to show on Saturdays, after the cartoons. So, but you notice in the kung fu movies that they would always have these fighting styles, right? These secret, teachings. There would be a big school, but it would be only certain moves that would be reserved for the lineage of the person who start the school. And so, from there it kind of went into clans. So like when you have the Wu-Tang clan, that's a family, that's a fighting style that was reserved for that family. And if you wanted to learn about it, you had to be married into the family, because that's how the wisdom was passed on. When you read Malidoma Some's work of Water in the Spirit, you learn about the Bora Four. That now it's a name of a whole ethnic group of Daguerre people. It's a whole community called the Bora Four, but it's a literal family. And the technology and the wisdom and the sciences belonging to the Bora Four is only for that bloodline, only that lineage. And so when a lot of people are going into these communities thinking that stuff is for the whole community, don't understand African people. Some of this stuff is just in the family. I keep this stuff in my family. So that's why he says you first must ask your father and then your mother. Those are your first initiates. When Fukiao was initiated into the schools, he was first initiated by his maternal uncles. Credu Mutua was initiated by his grandmother and uncles, because it's a family thing. And then you go into the greater system. So now let me read the second part again. The answer rise to other questions necessary for the complete understanding. If the candidate does not actively participate in the exchange, it is because either he has understood what was previously told, but does not perceive the continuation of the problem, or he is not mature enough to understand it is in a symbolic sense. In both cases, the instructor is required to remain silent. He must wait for the other to come back at his own initiative, perhaps pursuant to another problem, to the subject in question. He will then give an answer. His good will is not at all diminished. He is there, present, untiring, but is somewhat passive in a somewhat passive way. He doesn't give a lesson, but rather directs and guides a sort of investigation. And so what makes Griot different when you read about Griot is that he was constantly questioning. He was constantly going back, wanting deeper and deeper answers. They would direct him someplace, he would go do some self-study, and then he would come back. This Walter Van Beek did not do. Walter Van Beek, although he did like around 10 years of study, he would only be there at 3 months at the most at a time. And what he would do is just record what they would say. He would probably ask a few questions and then go on about his business. The difference between Van Beek and his crew and Griot is an initiate. When Griot died, they gave him a chief's funeral. When Van Beek dies, he's not going to get a chief's funeral. This should tell you something off the bat. But we're going to continue because this is going to be very important. However, even during instruction, and if the student has understood that a system does exist, he is not given the key to it. Just because you ask don't mean you get access to the information. It is up to the candidate himself to find it. In other words, Walter Van Beek comes in like most Westerners do, trying to be a teacher instead of a student. And to get deep Dogon information, you have to be a student. Continuing, likewise, when he was eventually received and assimilated this knowledge, understood a certain number of sacred texts, realized the meaning of ritual gestures, etc., he himself must make the connections between different fragments or points of view and produce the synthesis of the story of the world. So this is another aspect of the conversation that is not talked about, is that you have to add. They're just not going to tell you something and you just repeat it verbatim. They're looking at how to trying to help you to critically think, to help you to come to conclusions on your own instead of just waiting on us to give you the information. It is a true school. And so you are supposed to synthesize. This is part of the reason why certain people will have certain information while certain others don't. Because given the body of wisdom, some have come to their own conclusions and have either added on, or just have a different interpretation, a different way in order to tell the narrative. So understanding Dogon pedagogy is critically important for this conversation. So now we're going to get into the meat of this. The Dogon, who have classified everything, have established a hierarchy by degrees of instruction of the initiates. Their knowledge spans 4 degrees, which are from the least to the most important: the Giriso, the Bineso, the Boloso, and the Sodai. The Giriso, or the foreword, is a source of knowledge with simple explanations in which mythical personages are often disguised, their adventures simplified or fantasized, all this in seemingly unrelated parts. It deals with visible things and deeds with rituals and modern materials. So if we were to give what Credo Mutwa was talking about in Endowed My Children in terms of the surface carvings and artwork, that would be considered Giri So, forward. The bineso, the side word, includes the words which are in the giriso and the deeper explanation of certain parts of the rites and some. Sorry, I gotta scroll a little bit here. I don't know if that comes out clear on your screen. Let me know here. All righty. So representations. Its coordination appears only within the greater divisions of knowledge, which remain partly unveiled. So the side word, the bineso, and so is the word for word. The side word is there's a little bit more information, but there are large parts that haven't been revealed just yet, right? Then there's the boloso, the back word. This completes the preceding knowledge on the one hand and furnishes synthesis applicable to greater parts of the whole on the other hand. It does not, however, contain the very secret parts. So you can have the giriso, the foreword, the bineso, the side word, and the boloso, the back word. It's still all surface information, none of the secret stuff. So you have to go through at least these 3 layers of initiation to begin to even get the secret stuff. So now we have the sodaye, clear word, which concerns itself with the edifice of knowledge in its ordered complexity. But he says, but initiation is not only an accumulation of knowledge. You're not just a regurgitator of information, nor even a philosophy, a manner of thinking. It is of an educational nature, for it forms or models the individual at the same time he is assimilating the knowledge it offers. But it's still more than this through its vital character. By making the structures of the universe understood, it progressively leads the initiate to a way of life as conscious and complete as possible in nature and within his society in the world as it was conceived and organized by God. So, hold on one sec. Let me see. Let me see, man. I'm trying to see. It's another part I want to read here. Rather, it shows evidence of serious examination of varying conditions of life and death. So, just getting into, more deeply into the function of the education itself. And so, it's the initiation is a process of critical thinking and reflection. And so, but this is one part I want to get to, and that is, let me see. And this one just kind of reinforces some of the stuff that I meant, that I stated earlier, and how every aspect of the life is related to the system of thought that was organized and constructed by the elders, who are the keepers of the culture and who shape and give the curriculum and the direction for the community. So, but this is what I want to get to here. He says, thus is introduced into the life of the Dogon as fourth dimension, characteristic of myth and symbolism as necessary to their existence as drinking and eating, and which move, da da da. But we're going to go to this part here. So this is page, for those who are following, I'm on page 71, right? He says, it is fitting to tell how the investigations which made this book possible took place on location, right? He says the Dogon had, since 1931, answered questions and commented on the observations made during the successive expeditions from the perspective of factual interpretation, which they call the foreword, the giriso. That is to say, the first one they give to those wishing to learn. The publications preceding the investigations of 1947 all stem from this first interpretation. In view of the perseverance manifested by Marcel Griot and his team, in view of the abundance of questions which became more and more difficult to answer without penetrating into another level, in view also of the desire to understand what motivated us, which remained far from satisfied by previous discussions, in view of the fact that obviously this desire was more important to us than any other concern, and in view, let me see, in view of the interest constantly shown by Marcel Griot for Dogon daily life, observing their efforts to cultivate a difficult terrain where water was often lacking in between seasons, in view of personal relations, which were not limited to the investigation, but rather became more and more confidential and friendly, the Dogon made a decision. This is very important. So I'm a hop back here, and I'm going to recall what Walter von Beek said. Remember, he stated Griot published on the Dogon from the early 30s, from 1931 to 33 until his death in 56. 65 became the birth of the pale fox text. So for present purposes, his Dogon ethnography may be divided into three major periods. From 1931 till 1948, he published descriptive accounts of Dogon life, concentrating on material culture. His thesis, the Dogon Mask, is the high point of this period, which Clifford calls Griot's documentary phase. My critique is not directed at his works of this period or those of his many collaborators. Indeed, their vision of Dogon culture coincides to a significant degree with mine. It is the latter presentation, that which was after 1948, of Dogon culture with which it is concerned. So when we go back and we read, this makes perfect sense. So it tells you the publications preceding the investigations of 1947 all stemmed from the first interpretation, the Giri So, the foreword. This is the information that they give everybody. So of course, Walter Van Beek was going to be able to corroborate these parts of the story. But Walter Van Beek was not an initiate. They're telling you here why the Dogon took favor with Griot and why he was given more information than anybody else. Because unlike other Europeans who go into Africa and come in as superiors and they just want to document and leave, Griot built a personal relationship with the people and was involved in the everyday life of the people. This is why he was initiated. This is why he was given a chief's funeral at his death. And what's really, crazy is that his body wasn't even in Dogon country. They made a mummy and conducted the funeral rites for Griot when he died, once they got word of his death. So we're dealing with a totally different situation here. But we're going to continue. So, of interest constantly shown by Marcel Griot for Dogon daily life, observing their efforts to cultivate a difficult terrain where water was often lacking in between seasons, in view of personal relations which were not limited to the investigation, but rather became more and more confidential and friendly. The Dogon made a decision. We discovered this only later. So they weren't even privy of this at the time. They themselves told us about this. So the Dogon told us what was going on, which they're about to talk about now. The patriarchs of the lineages of the double Ogo village and the principal totemic priests of the Sangha region held council and decided to instruct Marcel Griot. For the preliminary work, they designated one of their most qualified elders, Ogotomeli, who, as is told in the introduction to God of Water, or the Conversations with Ogotomeli, solicited the first meeting. The investigation lasted exactly the number of days specified in the Conversations with Ogotomeli, in which the rambling stream of information was faithfully recounted. And each day, unbeknown to us, a report was made to the council on the progress of the instruction. So here you have them, they didn't know this at the time, but they, it was known later, after the death of Ogotomeli or whatnot, that he was reporting back to a council. And this is what I meant earlier, that they just don't give out information. There has to be a meeting, and these two locations are going to be very important. It say themselves told us about it. The patriarchs of the lineages. Remember, it's bloodlines in terms of information. The lineages of the double Ogo village and the principal totemic priests of the Sangha region. Remember that name, Sangha. We're going to talk about Sangha in just a little bit. Region held council and decided to instruct Griot. And so they sent Ogotomeli. And so the task was all the more worthy in that the Dogon knew perfectly well that in doing this, they were opening the door not just to 33 days of information, but to months and years of intensive work. So even though he got 33 days of instructions, they knew for a fact that Marcel Griot was not going to be satisfied with that information. He was going to want more. And so he continued for years after that, studying, learning amongst the Dogon. You don't find this with Walter von Beek. They never deviated from this position, and we express here all our gratitude. After Ogotomeli passed, other initiates took his place. So it wasn't just Ogotomeli that was giving him information. Once he passed, the mantle was given to other initiates to further instruct Marcel Griot until his death. He says, after Griot's death, they persevered with the same patience and desire to perfect the job undertaken. So guess who else got the instructions? His daughter. His daughter is a dang initiate. They made her into a man and initiated her. This is how she was able to complete the book. See, you have to have context. So what does it say here? The narrative we transcribe here stems from the interpretation of facts seen from the point of view of the clear word, so dai, also called the good word, so ezu, the fourth word. For the initiate, it constitutes the final state of knowledge, which is only acquired through long years of application and perseverance. So this is why the conversation of Giri so, Bini so, Bolo so dai is very important, because the instructions prior to 1947 or prior to 1948 were all Giri so, forward information, not even Bini so or Bolo so. But only after years of perseverance, of building relationships, of application of the wisdom. Now, so this makes sense to why this text is going to be different than any other text that is written about the Dogon from an outsider, from so-called anthropologists. Marcel Griot earned the right to this information. And so now you're getting with their permission, because you got to get permission to publish this stuff. They wouldn't give it to him without the understanding. They knew that he's going to publish it. It's in the same way that for those of you who are familiar with Maladoma Some, another Dogon priest, under the banner of the Daguerre people. These are the same folks. The only reason why you get Daguerre information is because the elders in Burkina Faso gave permission to Dr. Malidoma Some to share some of the wisdom of the Daguerre people, which is published in his, books, including, of course, Of Water and the Spirit and The Healing Wisdom of Africa and Ritual, right? And then his late wife, Sabonfu Some, in The Spirit of Intimacy, right? He tells you that I got permission to share this, but I only have permission to share so much. So there's a lot more that I could tell you, but I can't tell you because the elders haven't given me permission. And so you're getting these narratives from an initiate. That's the difference between Walter Van Beek and his team versus Marcel Griot and Germain Dertinline. So we continue. For the initiate, it constitutes the final stage of knowledge, which is only acquired through long years of application and perseverance. But this narration does not constitute the entirety of this word, because the possession of very secret general principles and processes of calculation is not enough to say of someone that he holds the clear word. So even though he's at this stage, he still ain't got all of it. He must materially know all the details involved. Thus, the system of graphic signs, which includes thousands, must be theoretically possessed in its entirety and not simply known in its structure and its functioning. And so I could go on, but I think this is what he says. It contains, nevertheless, the essence of the broad outline of Dogon initiatic thought and knowledge. And so ending on page 73. So I hope y'all understand exactly, what was stated here. So now we're going to go back to our presentation. So his critique of the early work, he has critique about information that he wouldn't have had access to confirm in the first place. So he's starting off wrong. And so starting on page 142, he says this: Griot often asserted that Dogon culture exemplified a general Sudanic culture and predicted that variants of Dogon beliefs would be found among other groups. However, the Bambara, as described by Zahan and Dertinline, never produced an Ogotomeli to reveal the deeper meanings and correlations beneath the surface of public culture. The same holds for the work of other Griot students. Nor were these deep insights ever reproduced in any other part of Africa. He just makes a whole bold claim. African ethnography knows only one Ogotomeli, only one Renard Pal. And that's, the pale fox. That's what that phrase means. So this is just very disingenuous and silly. For one, it's clear that he must not have heard of Amadou Hapati Ba, who is of Bambara and Fulani ancestry. Read the works of Amadou Hapati Ba. You will find these in he's Bambara, and he echoes much of what you find in Dogon lore. When you read about Ga and Akan and Daguerre wisdom tradition, you'll find echoes that in certain things that you find amongst the Dogon. But then he has, like, as if he's super knowledgeable about Africa and all of the wisdom literature found in Africa. Now, keep in mind, to a certain extent, I will give him this, that much of the works about Africa were written by outsiders And not until the 60s and 70s were initiated Africans themselves writing about the writing about this information in terms of their own traditions. So, keep in mind that this is 1991 that this article was published. So I don't think Malidoma Some was published at this time, but Fukiao definitely was. There were other ones that definitely were. Credu Mutwa definitely was. His book came out, Adopted My Children came out in 64, I believe. And there are other texts that that of course Sheikh Anta Diop and Obinga at this time have already highlighted and brought about. So this idea that Ogo Tameli is the only one, and keep in mind we read from that it wasn't just Ogo Tameli. Ogo Tameli died, and other priests in the system came in and further educated Marcel Griot. So he isn't even really caught up on the understanding of how he even got the information. So this is problematic. So we continue on page 143. And remember, I'm selectively taking some of these quotes because I plan on doing a more detailed critique of some of the major points that he's making. But the one that we're dealing with here is because he keeps, when you read the article, he keeps harping over that all of the information just comes from one person, Ogo Tameli. It doesn't come from one person. And it started off in terms of the second phase of his education with Ogo Tameli, but Ogo Tameli is the voice of a council of elders. And when he died, other subsequent elders continued the education. And so it did not stop with those 33 days of instruction. He just documented that and created the book based on that first 33 days. But there were subsequent days and years. And you would think that somebody who allegedly read the text would know this. So let's continue. He says the location was selected, and he's talking about, so now he's getting into the part of the where he went to so-called restudy the Dogon. So when he's talking about the location that he went to study. So the location was selected accordingly. Griot and his collaborators worked mainly in Sangha. Remember I said Sangha, to keep that name in mind. A conglomerate of 10 Dogon villages. So Sangha is really 10 different villages that are together, built close together. An important market as well as administrative center for the Dogon area. Sangha is in several ways atypical. Its total population is quite large, and the earliest Christian and Muslim influence radiated from it. So keep this in mind. At the time that Griot was doing his research, Christianity and Islam did not have much of an influence, if any at all, in this area. But since this time, they have been infiltrated by Christianity and Islam, and it's from this area that it is permeating into other areas of Dogon territory, right? So thus, it offers at once a concentration of Dogon culture and a peculiar variant of it. Further, Sangha has been influenced by tourism and in a lesser way by the tradition of Griot research. I chose a village of 1,800 people, see figure 1, close enough to Sangha, 9 kilometers, to share its cultural variant to a significant degree and far enough from it to avoid excessive tourism and research influence. So how the hell are you supposed to be reduplicating the Griot study by not following the path in which Griot took? And this is significant because for those of you who don't understand, because a lot of us, we don't use kilometers. 9 kilometers is essentially 5.5 miles. apart. So instead of concentrating in Sangha, he goes 5.5 miles in a different direction and he starts his study and wants to do it there. And so, in all fairness, I note here what he says after. He says, part of the research, of course, had to be carried out in Sangha, working with informants from both within and beyond Griot's circle. So he did engage with Sangha, but that wasn't his primary thing. He's trying to avoid it. But how can you avoid the center which gave him the instruction? But keep in mind that he's coming in the late 70s. This is decades from 1948. And so much has happened since then, thus why it's a big tourism thing, because Marcel Griot made Sangha famous. So now it's a tourist. It's just like it's just like Egypt. When you go to Egypt, once you get off the plane in Cairo, you are going to be bombarded with people trying to sell you all kinds of trinkets and things. It is a big tourist attraction. Why? Because of all of the people coming and reporting about ancient Egypt and the monuments. So people come to see it. So everybody hears about the famous Dogon. So now what is told and being shared there is shaped by Griot's work. So I understand that he's trying to avoid it, but you can't avoid it. You have to go through the processes in the place and with the people and with the priesthood that exists there. Because remember what I said, this stuff is lineage based, it's family based. And so you going 6 miles in a different direction, you may run into a totally different family that has a totally different set of instructions and initiations. And so one of my major problems with the work of Walter van Beek is that he's trying to critique, it's just unscientific what he's doing. Because in science, when you want to replicate a study, you have to follow it as close as possible, the initial results, to see if you can reduplicate it. Then, and only then, do you add different other variables and change certain things to answer some other more nuanced questions regarding the research. So Walter van Beek and his crew are not being initiated. They don't spend the same amount of time. They don't build the same relationships, and they're not even concentrated in the same place in which Griot and others, were initiating, got their information. But now they have a whole article talking about we can't reduplicate what Marcel Griot and them published in 48 and in 65, etc. And because of that, because because I'm a better researcher than Griot, because I can't find the information, it's false. And that's the problem. And so he continues, and check out the arrogance of this statement. He says, and this is on page 143, I expected Dogon society and religion to be shaped to a significant degree by the exigencies of survival in a harsh natural environment in which droughts and locusts figured, as well as historical processes such as war, slave raiding, colonization, and state penetration. I expected a small-scale village society such as a Dogon to show some integration of material basis, social organization, and religion. To a certain extent, I found what I expected, but overall, he was disappointed, which he goes into further on the subsequent pages. But how do you come expecting all of this and then expect to reduplicate? So this is what I mean. He already came in with a certain bias, a certain level of expectations, and he was looking for something. The difference between Van Beek and Griot is that Griot just came and he was a student with no expectations. He let the people, he let the ancestors speak, as we would say. And he just recorded what the people told him. Matter of fact, when you read The Pale Fox, it tells you that we don't try to interpret anything. This is why it's so hard for people to get through The Pale Fox, because it's just giving you the information. It doesn't go in this long treatise of interpretation and tell you what this means, you know, for a large part of the greater conversation. You're supposed to get this on its own. Griot is treating you like an initiate. You're supposed to read this and synthesize this with other data and come to your own conclusions and ask questions and come back and revisit. He's created an initiatory text. And so this is something that, you know, must be understood. So when somebody like Von Beeks come in with all these expectations and then he's disappointed, we can't take him serious. He's not a serious scholar in this sense. Because you don't come with the expectation. You as a scholar, if you're doing any kind of ethnographic work, you may have a general framework in which to ask certain questions, but you don't come expecting them to tell you what you believe they should be telling you. And it's because of this bias that he can't even believe that the Dogon told Griot this information in the first place. They couldn't have come up with this complex system of thought and philosophy. As I stated again, so now we're going to insult the intelligence of the Dogon, not directly. We're going to do it by criticizing Griot and making it seem like Griot's the one who is lying here, and he's the one who told the Dogon this stuff and just made up this entire 500-page book of information. It's a bunch of BS. And this is the kind of stuff that we have to deal with as African scholars, going behind these folks and correcting their flawed research methodologies. So, and this is, I found very interesting. I'm surprised he even put it in the text. But on page 144, he says, working so close to and in Sangha was in a way a haunting experience. Griot is still present in Sangha, though mainly as the initiator of the first dam. Remember that he helped to build the first dam there. He was part of the community. He used his privilege and resources to bring some levels of stability. And again, remember, he fought on behalf of the Dogon when a certain troop tried to come in and wreak havoc on the Dogon. So research is considered normal but superfluous. So the Dogon are speaking to him now, which I have bolded in red. Why write this down? All the books have already been written about us. Think about that for a second. Why write this down? All the books have already been written about us. We already told you what we wanted to tell you. So they're showing you right now that he's not going to get it. They didn't trust him. He didn't have the same relationship Griot had with the Dogon. I write this down. All the books have already been written about us. Remember, they since the early 1900s have been engaged with scholarship from various folks. Now you're going to come all Johnny come lately, like you're going to discover something new. What they're asking them essentially, what do you want? White man. So again, the title of the text is Dogon Restudied, a field evaluation of the work of Marcel Griot. And when you go further down into the text, he kind of summarizes his critiques. So I eventually just want to go through is 5 major points that he addresses here. And so I want to, we kind of really dealt with in this one, the first one, where he says the Dogon know no proper creation myth, neither the version of Ogotomeli nor that of Renard Pal is recognizable to informants. The figure of Ogo is unknown. The fox as a divining animal has no privileged position in mythology. This Sirius is a double star is unknown. Astronomy is of very little importance in religion. Dogon society has no initiatory secrets beyond the complete mastery of public known text. This is a bunch of BS. But the framework in which we're talking about now, for the most part, addresses some of that, because we're going to deal with the serious stuff later. But let me see. He says the supernatural world of the Dogon is more diverse and much more vague, ambivalent, and capricious than represented in, the God of Water and Renard Pal. The role of ancestors in Dogon religion is limited. Again, he's not an initiate, and I think ultimately he feels some kind of way because he wasn't privileged to get the information, to get access to the people in a way that Griot did. And so what I want to deal with here, I think I want to deal with number 4. Like, for example, he says the crucial concept, and the 4 is over here on the right. The crucial concept of Vinyama, allegedly vital force, is irrelevant to Dogon religion. The etymologies given in conversations with Ogotomeli and the Pale Fox are not retraceable and seem highly idiosyncratic. And matter of fact, they answered that in the text before he even knew about the Dogon. And what he said is that he gave the definitions that the people gave in terms of their understanding. See the difference? Now he wants to, talk about linguistic etymology. They're not linguists. But the fundamental character of this concept of Inyama is all across, and it means the vital force, and which is, so this is why I'm gonna skip that and go to this. So if some of y'all may have this text here called The Ways of the Elders, West African Spirituality and Tradition. And I love this quote that they have, wherever there is sky, there is spirit. So this is a husband and wife team, Adama and Naomi Diombia, both PhDs. And they are from West Africa, Ivory Coast. And, they have studied, like, this text here is a summary of major concepts found throughout West Africa, religious traditions. And so it's interesting. These are a bunch of Jele out of Senegal, storytellers or whatnot, keepers of the information. But in this text, The Way of the Elders, West African Spirituality Tradition, it says every spirit belongs to spirit. Some of our spirits live as human beings, others are forces of nature. They respond to our petitions, though they also operate from their own agendas. If we are unaware of any spirits, they are better able to exercise their own will and roam about freely. The focus of our lives is how effectively to interact with the world of spirit. I'm not sure I wanted to read that one, but probably the next one. So keep in mind what he was talking about in terms of Inyama. So Inyama is a concept all throughout Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Mali, in Senegal, in even Central and Southern Africa. Nyama it permeates through all these different groups. And so to make this argument shows that he knows, as long as he's been there and studied, he knows very little about African thought. And so on page 5, the text says, Nyama is the energy that emanates from spirit and flows throughout the universe. It is the life force that links all of existence together. Humans, animals, plants, and minerals. The power of creation and destruction. Nyama commands everything from bountiful harvests to droughts and plagues. It directs the twinkling stars and the rippling tides. This energy of the universe shapes nature into its many forms and yields to our handling of its power. We draw from this potent force that connects all of creation, is the fuel for all of our activities. And Yama is the source of energy for every word, thought, and action. To live harmoniously with nature, we live with a sensitivity to the power of Nyama. To recognize this energy is to appreciate that everything is interconnected, integral parts of a whole. This is Kimoyo at its best. And what Von Beek tried to argue is that this concept of Inyama was not essential to the creation narrative and to the underlying philosophy. Is BS. The Dogon system is a Kimoyo system. And remember that Kimoyo is the art of dynamism and vitality. It replaces that concept of animism that the Europeans have labeled, even though I don't think it is, too far off conceptually. But we have indigenous terms, and so we use Kimoyo. But Moyo is equivalent to Nyama amongst the West Africans. And so one of the things that Von Beek tried to argue is that the Dogon is not like all the other African groups. And I'm like, what the hell have you read to make this argument? What planet does he live on? The Dogon lore is mirrors. And matter of fact, this is something that Griot even mentioned. Matter of fact, Griot even recognized the commonality between Dogon philosophy and Bantu philosophy. Matter of fact, and I keep hold on one second. Let me quote verbatim. Because this is something that I cite even on the China Into film website. So y'all can go to chinaintofilm.com. I have the citation, at the bottom of the homepage. So I'm pulling up on my other computer so I can read it verbatim. And this is how silly Von Beek and his ilk are. So hopefully, here we go. This is how we do. I'm sorry, this computer over here acting all kinds of slow today. So there's a prominent Egyptologist who states, his name is Serge Sonoron, and in his book he has a book written in French, but it's also been translated into English, called The Priest of Ancient Egypt. And in it he says, thus the revelations of Ogotumeli or of Bantu philosophy turn out to contribute precious information which helps us to better understand certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. But in this connection, there is little, if anything, we can expect from a reading of Plato. So if the Dogon was just this isolated thing, why would these other scholars recognize the synthesis, the commonalities between Dogon thought, Bantu philosophy, and ancient Egyptian religion and philosophy? Which lets me know that at least by the time of this publication in 1991, Van Beek had no idea of what was going on in Africa, even though he did some prior studies in the northern part of Cameroon with this one village out there. But he's not a student of Africa, and it shows. And so the concept of Nyama, which is in West Africa, is found among the Kung in the Kalahari in Southwest Africa, but it's called Noom. And so you can read this book here, Boiling Energy, Community Healing Among the Kalahari Kung by Richard Katz. And this is one of the texts that I show that, the concept of Kundalini energy, that is native to Africa. Now, it's not expressed fully in the way that you find in India with the chakras, but Kundalini energy existing at the base of the spine and then coming out at the top of the head, all of that is indigenous to Africa. And I got sources on it that has nothing to do with any introduction to Indians. So all the chakra haters, y'all just gonna have to hate. But and so there's an article that I've written that I haven't published. So this is just me citing my article here. And I state that Richard Katz in his book Boiling Energy, Community Healing Among the Kalahari Kung, 1982, discusses in detail a healing dance that the Kung performs to help their bodies get into trance-like state called Kia. They reach this state by the activation of an energy that they call Num. They say that Num was given to them by the gods. It is a painful experience and is feared by the Kung. The cause of Kia, the activated Num, is said to boil fiercely within the person. That's why the book is called Boiled Energy. They're talking about the boiled Num that is at the base of the spine. Instead of meditating and then the Kundalini rising and escaping at the top of the head, you have to dance the Kundalini. You have to boil the Num, the Inyama. And so this is a good book to have for those who are students of Africa. And so Num is the basis of the healing dance. The word Num is often translated as medicine, but Katz, 1982, page 93, translated as energy. Just like in Yama in West Africa. And so I'm gonna go back because he, again, Van Beek makes it that he's making throughout he's making the argument throughout the text that the Dogon is not like any of the other groups, and that you don't find commonalities in regards to certain particular concepts. And so we know within Yama that, because that deserves its own lecture unto itself, because I can go off on Inyama all throughout West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. We can go there, and we can go there in ancient Kemet as well. You know how I do. And so let me see. Body symbol is not the basis of house plans of the land, the villages. Cosmological symbol is not the basis of their cultures. Numerical symbolism is present. Like, he's just making all kinds of claims that he doesn't know because he's not initiated. And that's I have issues with a lot of German scholars when they come into Africa. European scholars in general, but especially Germany. But so what's interesting, for example, is this citation coming out of the Pale Fox. So Bibile, this word is cognate with the word Keper of ancient Egypt. Metamorphosis of the Po, which is the seed, which is Per in ancient Egyptian. And what you see here is a graphic or a drawing, which is the pre-configuration of human beings according to the Dogon. And I have to do a whole lecture on the importance of spiral, of the spiral in Africa in relationship to cosmology and the like. And so this will be the last part of the conversation and out in this segment in just a little bit. So on pages 134 to 135, we talk about man from spiral. in from evolution, it is said inside the Po, which is the symbol of the smallest, which is, because I have to bring it back to our previous conversation in terms of atoms. We had concept of atoms, and for the Dogon, what the Greeks would call atoms, the Dogon would call Po. So everything is built from these Po stacked upon each other, which gives form to the matter in which we see, right? And the ancient Egyptians use the same language in one of their traditions. And so we'll get on to that in a future conversation, because people be sleeping on African cosmology and African philosophy and things of this nature. And so the symbol of the smallest, it is an even smaller thing, which is life. Life developed at the same time as its means of support, made of the blended elements. This development worked in the principle of a motion, turning in a conical spiral. So this is what this is supposed to mean. It's supposed to be a conical. You know what a cone is, and then of course it's circular at the top, and then kind of like the Bantu V that you find in Congo. It's the same concept. And so it is said when life increases, it increases by whirling, which is a repetition of Amma's first act, because that imitates how Amma came out of the egg of the world. And so the representation of a man is a spiral or a circle. And so this is just one aspect of the articulation of the sacred knowledge of the Dogon. Again, I keep mentioning this cat, Amadou Hapati Ba. He's the one who gave us that famous phrase, when an elder dies, it is like a library has been burnt. Right? That comes from him. And again, he is of Bambara and Fulani heritage. These folks are related to the Dogons. And so when he says in his text, to contain man, the all-in-one being, Mangala, the creator, devised a special body, vertical and symmetric, able to contain at one and the same time a piece of all the existing beings. You'll find this sounds just like Dogon once you study Dogon. This body called Fari symbolizes a sanctuary where all beings are moving in a circle. This is why tradition regards the body of man as the world in miniature, according to the expression Mayi di Medinin Diye in Bambara, I don't know, which means man is the universe in miniature. It has moving in the circle. It's the circle spiral thing and associated with man. You find this in amongst the Bambara and the Fulani uh, traditions, in which he talks about a lot. You find that in the Dogon. So we're going to continue. So remember what I said. This is Dr. Maladoma Soman. This is coming from Of Water and the Spirit, his text. It starts off the conversation on page 199. All human beings are circles. Our setting part represents the coolness of water. It provides the peace of the body and the soul, and bridges the gap between how we look on the outside and how we are on the inside. It brings to us our family, the village, and the community. It makes us many. The God of the setting side is the God of the water we drink, and the water that quenches our thirst. But all human beings are circles. And remember what I said, the Daguerre people are just the cousins of the Dogon. And when you talk about the Dogon, you're really talking about a priesthood. And so you have Daguerre Dogons in Burkina Faso. So when you look at the stretch of land that is in this particular area, it's just one continuous. The modern borders are not historical borders for African people. You have parts of the same groups that exist along a large stretch of land, which are divided by our modern borders. So you find Daguerre people in Mali, Ivory, I mean, excuse me, uh, uh, the in Ghana, in northern part of Ghana, all in that same area, and of course Burkina Faso, and I meant to say Cote d'Ivoire. That's where you find Daguerre and Dogon and Bambara and Mande. These are all historically the same groups. And that's why the aspects of their cosmogony, their philosophy, and religion are similar in terms of these major concepts. They may be expressed in a different way, which Griot already told us in the beginning of our conversation. And so when you go into the Congo with African cosmology of the Bantu Congo, this circle, this spiral represents a lot of things, including man. And then we go to South Africa. And so there's a text, and this is coming from one of my other articles that I've written, and and I'm talking about the philosophy and ideas coming out of the Amazulu. So now this individual, and we make fun of Madame Blavatsky and the whole theosophist movement, but he's part of that movement. But Captain P.G. Bowen is who I'm talking about here. But he spent a lot of time in South Africa, and like Griot, got certain initiations and was able to tell these stories and recorded these stories. But he ran into, when you run into the article, and this was published in 1927, but it speaks about an early experience, kind of like 1911, 1915, And so when Captain Bowen went down there, he found some Berbers in South Africa who were initiated into the isiZulu tradition. And this is all, plausible, especially when you read the work of Credo Mutwa and in Ndabamai children. And he talks about how a lot of the North Africans traveled, in the time before Tashaka Zulu and lived among them and stayed. So now to the point where they speak, the isiZulu language. And so, he was struck because they considered the Berbers whites, and so he was talking about his white teachers. But then there were other, saying Zulu initiates who were there instructing him. And so I stayed here. In August of 1927, an article was published in the Theosophist, an esoteric theosophy magazine written by Captain P.G. Bowen, who was an Irishman, titled "The Ancient Wisdom of Africa." In this account, he recalls his interactions with a Zulu brotherhood called the Bonabakulu Abasikimu, the Brotherhood of the Higher Ones of Kemet, Egypt, where they began to teach him some of the wisdom of their tradition. At one point, he was under the guidance of Mandalanga, the strength of the sun. The word of Mandala is a word for like power, strength, and then Ilanga Langa is a word for sun. So who instructed him on the nature of the creator, who the Zulu call Itango, which would be cognate with Aten and Ntangwa in Kikongo. And so in the text, he states the following. So hopefully y'all can read that. And just in case you can't, let me just make that more full screen. So y'all can read it. So, and this is going to be relevant as well to the Big Bang conversation, because just like what you find in Central Africa and in ancient Kemet, you're going to find this watery, fluid-like existence, and then the emergence of matter and things coming out of this in the Zulu tradition. And so he says, understanding of what occurred is best gained by the following conception. Think of the cosmos just before individuality began. as a vast amorphous ocean of mind and matter. Its surface ripples and upper reaches those planes of mind which touch on spirit, growing denser and denser, downward till matter in etheric form is reached, downward till ether becomes gas, which may be likened to the mineral charged lower strata of the ocean. And you can tell that this is kind of where he's kind of using that theosophist, esoteric language to try to articulate uh, what he was taught by the Amazulu in South Africa. So downward till gases become liquids in muddy water, finally into solids, thick mud. The beginning of individuality in this cosmic ocean may be likened to the starting of myriads of tiny whirlpools, spirals again, under the force of a growing flood tide, extended deeper and deeper till at least all strata were involved in the swirl. Thus, we have individuality set up extending from spiritual mind to the physical plane. The whirlpool on the surface represents the birth of the soul. Its extension to the muddy depths represent the soul's descent into matter. In matter, the soul has reached the affluon of its cycle, and now it begins its long, slow journey, return journey. By the process of evolution, it climbs slowly upward from mineral to plant, from plant to animal, from animal to man, through all grades and states of human development, shaking off slowly and painfully as it climbs. The gross accretions gathered during its descent up through the lower mind in the higher is climbed till at last the cycle is complete. It merges with its source, the Itango, and ceases to be an individual, being one with the all. So what they're saying here is that there is a fluid uh plane that, of course, we would call the field, right? The unified field, right? The Gaga, God Almighty Grand Unified Theory, but it's dealing with this unified field that they call the Itango, God, because remember, God is existence. And just like, because this is before this stuff was published in 27, but it's earlier, so there's no, they couldn't have gotten this from any of the scientific literature, because this wasn't part of the discussion in terms of fields and in terms of, for example, particles being agitations, ripples in the fields. And so they're already talking about this in the Zulu tradition. This is why, the book that I'm writing, Quantum Mechanics as African Inheritance, is going to be very important, because I'm going to discuss all of this. So we're going to continue. Of the source of power we wield, the pupil can learn but little until he attains discipleship. So he's going and explaining that, just like what we saw amongst the Dogon, is the same here, that amongst the Amazulu, there's stages and levels to the information. And certain information is only given to certain disciples after a long journey of learning and perseverance, to use the words of Griot. Same thing. And we read that was confirmed by Credo Mutwa, and this is confirmed by PG Bowen here regarding the Amazulu. So, of the source of power we wield, the pupil can learn but little until he attains discipleship. But let him ponder this much: I have likened individuality to whirlpools. His teacher is talking right now, the person who's initiating him. So he's quoting his teacher. I have likened individuality to whirlpools in the cosmic ocean, but all that ocean has not been cast into individuality. Between the whirlpools, myriad though they be, stretch wide, smooth spaces, identical with them in composition. Now it can now well be conceived that a whirlpool, by setting up minor vibrations within itself, may send out ripples through the smooth surfaces, which will strike upon and affect to in some degree other whirlpools. All the whirlpools are constantly doing this. Now, suppose a whirlpool to have gained power to control its internal vibrations and to send them pulsating through the ocean towards whatever objective it desires. Can you not see that it may produce upon that objective whatever effect it desires? Now, think of the whirlpool as being a man. It is not clear that by getting full control of the vibrations of his higher planes, he may dispatch through the cosmic ocean of which he is a part ripples of various kinds and intensities, which, according to their nature and strength, will reproduce effects of all strata, from the highest, which is, of course, the most sensitive, even down to the slime and mud of the depths. I give you this as food for thought and bid you digest it well. And so, again, just like what we find in Congo, in Burkina Faso, in the Cote d'Ivoire, and in Mali, man is a circle, man is a spiral. The language used here is a whirlpool, but this whirlpool is individuality in the cosmic ocean. And this is exactly how it is talked about in modern astrophysics, more so quantum physics, in terms of all particles just being agitations, ripples in the field. This is before any of that language. And so with that, I think I will end there. That should be around, I don't know what's up. I'm on 3 hours now. Yeah, I'm going on 3 hours. So I went way over my time. So I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to see what y'all talking about in these internet streets. So I can only go up so far back here. And I guess I will have to, and I'm not going to go. This is look like thousands of comments. So if y'all have a question, I will spend about like 10 minutes answering questions. So I'm not going to go up. So if you have a question, you have to type it in now and I will go from there. So I know there's going to be a delay. And so while there is a delay, y'all can check out this commercial. No, I won't do that one. No, I won't do that one. Yeah, I'll do this. Yes. Make sure that y'all, if y'all have not gotten your copy of Muntu Wine Zombie, go to maduandelapress.com and get your copy. That's the link right there from one of our prominent scholars, Dr. Chilemalema Mukinge. And it is subtitled Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation from African Creation Stories and Religious Beliefs and Cultural Practices. And so this is a very, very important text. And, you know, just one of many of Africans being able to tell their own story and do comparative work, which will reveal some amazing information. And so again, go to maduandelapress.com and get your copy. So let me see if anybody has anything here. Let me see. You keep telling us about others, but what knowledge have you acquired to falsify the claim? Yeah, I have to go back and check the to see what y'all talking about. Let me see. It says Buntala Manking Ui. Peace and blessings, Tony. Thank you for joining. Nobody has any questions. Was I just that good of an explainer that nobody has nothing to say other than whatever debates y'all have going on here? Let me see what it says. Sorry, based on your understanding, was the serious claim made by the Dogon, Ogotameli, or Griot? Of course, it comes from the Dogon itself. Now, whether they had discovered it or not that's a separate conversation. But I have no doubt that it arose from the minds and the culture of the Dogon people. And what's interesting is that, and I cannot find this documentary for nothing. One of the things that I wanted to focus on was on the pedagogical style of African people and how, especially amongst the Dogon, that the culture, that the philosophy is embedded in every aspect of the culture, so that when you're replicating and having these initiations and building up your societies in a particular way, that a lot of the information is being passed on, even no longer the inspirations behind certain things may no longer be done or may no longer be visible among the people. And so, this documentary that I was watching, the scientist was uh debating on whether the Dogon could have discovered such a thing. And what he stated is that at the time, like a period of like 2,000 years ago or something like that, that the companion star of Sirius B was visible to the naked eye for those who lived along a certain latitude, in North Africa. And if that is the case, that means the ancestors of the Dogon would have been able to see and record that, and it would have just been part of the everyday experience. But then as they just integrated it in the culture, it just became passed on to the culture, as now it's no longer, visible, because the shifting of planets and stars as time moved on over these years. So it's a testament to, how long information can be kept within a society, given the pedagogical strategy of the society, even after the initial phenomenon, the witness of the initial phenomenon, is no longer there. For example, just like how they do Yahweh. Yahweh is a volcano god, but they haven't had a volcanic interruption in the Middle East in a hot minute. And so it just comes as a result of the information being passed down for years without full understanding of the initial conversation. Let me see. Brandon Sims said or asked, do you know if Von Beek had access to the Dogon Keeper of Knowledge, the Hogon, during his ethnographic research? Even if he did, just because you have access, meaning that you can talk to him, don't mean you had access to information. See, what people have to realize is that, and I read some of it earlier, that when they feel that a certain person isn't ready for certain information, they remain silent and wait for you to come back when you have matured in your studies to be able to share further. So the question is, again, did Von Beek go through the process of trying to be a student of Dogon people? versus just an ethnographic researcher, an outsider just documenting what he sees. And so this is why that part of the conversation was important for even where Griot, the Giri So information, that was the bulk of his research coming from 1931 to 1947. So that's a little bit above a 15-year span. So for 15 years, he was just getting basic information. But after that point is when he got the deeper information. And only later did he get the information regarding the pale fox stuff. And that's not even the deep secret information, as we read in the text. So I know for a fact that Von Beek did not go through this process. He didn't respect the Dogon enough to gain access. So he can have access. That's like I can go to the White House at any time. And if the president is there, he may walk by and say hello, or I may even get a meeting with the president, and be able to interview him. But does that mean that I have access to the war room? Having access to the president doesn't give me the clearance to get the briefings every morning, concerning America, any kind of terrorist acts, any kind of financial issues, diseases, stuff like this, or any other kind of secret information. Having access to the person doesn't give you access to information. And so you always got to consider that. Let me see. Kit Nogan says, thank you for showing me his claim. You're not about to gaslight. You said, I never said I agree or disagree. Y'all having your own conversation. Let me see here. This is not how science works. I know these discussions. The brothers. Thank you. Let me see. He said, yeah, they having their own debate in the chat. So it doesn't look like anybody else has anything. So with that said, I do appreciate your time and rocking with me this late. So hopefully somebody have an after party on their channel. But I'm finna get me something to eat and then see what y'all doing in these internet streets. So, before, however, we go, make sure that you mark your calendars this Sunday. And we are going to, let me do this real quick. We asked Africa and beyond. So this Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Salim Faraji and brother Dr. Jahi Isa. And we're going to be talking about the Egyptian, Nubian, and West African Connections Conference, which will be held on the 15th and 16th of February. And so Dr. Isa is in Ghana currently. And then, of course, our brother Dr. Faraji is on the West Coast in Cali. And so, 1 p.m. would be kind of early in the morning for Dr. Faraji, but kind of, early evening going into, just a little bit after the afternoon for Dr. Isa in Ghana. And so they will both be joining us and we'll be having a conversation about it. And just in case you did not know about it, let me share my screen real quick. And so y'all can visit the website at, hold on one sec. There we go. So it's going to be West Africa beyond.org. Let me copy that and put that into the banners real quick so that y'all can get the link. So it's westafricabeyond.org. And here we will be discussing, it's a 2-day conference and it's a paid conference. You have to pay for the conference, but it's online, and you'll be able to listen and watch some of the top scholars talk about the connections between the Nile Valley, ancient Nubia and ancient Kemet, and West Africa. And so we want to look at some of the presenters. You go to the presenters page. So we have Dr. Abdul Salua, who wrote his PhD dissertation on the Egyptian origins of the Yoruba. We have, of course, Dr. Shamarka Keita. Your good brother Asarimhotep is in the building. We have Dr. Mahmoudal Nasir Sar, Sheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal. We have Dr. Ives Victor Ngono, Egyptologist. I think he's out of Cameroon. Of course, Dr. Jahi Issa, Dr. Salim Faraji, Dr. Om Ndiji, also out of Cameroon from the University of Yaoundé, who's a Egyptologist and a linguist. We have the PhD candidate, Anissa Malvoisin, who is getting her PhD in Egyptology and Nubian studies along the archaeological track. And we have another PhD candidate from Sheikh Anta Diop University, Lamin Baji. Our good brother Reggie is in the building. Dr. Sandro Capocici, who is, I want to say, out of Benin, who's a linguist as well, and Dr. Andrew Jaggs, who we've had on our program, on our channel, before, and he also wrote his PhD on the connections between ancient Egypt and Yoruba, and he's out of the UK. And so you can see this is a kind of international. He's in Nigeria, I believe, Dr. Abdul Salu. I've met him. Of course, Omendiji, familiar with Dr. Capocici and others. And of course, we know Brother Reggie. And so this is going to be a very dynamic conference. So you do not want to miss this live. So go to westafricabeyond.org for the conference, which is titled West Africa and Beyond, Ancient Nubian and Egyptian Interconnections with Niger Valley and the Atlantic World. So you can go here to the registration page and purchase, one or both of the days. You have to register for each day, and it's $35. So put your coins together, make it happen. And on this Sunday, we're going to talk about this a lot more. So with that said, y'all be blessed, and y'all have a good weekend. All right, peace.